Melvin. Welcome to the first installation of the video series Super Cool Parenting. Some of you may know who I am, through my books of teaching children how to read and do math. But you may not know that I'm also a teacher trainer. I teach teachers how to manage their classrooms. And one of the first things I teach them is how to remain super cool. And the reason I teach them this first because it's the most fundamental principle that they'll ever learn, that is really the building block that we build other principles upon. Why is being cool such a powerful and fundamental principle? Well, let's look at what is cool. Cool obviously is the opposite of hot. And I think we'll start there because it's easier to identify those characteristics because we see them quite a bit. When you say something is hot or someone is hot tempered, you say that's somebody, they're always getting angry, it don't take much for them to go off, or they're very aggressive. Well, that person is a hothead. And usually when we use that term, it's not a very good term, and people are oftentimes afraid of that person or a little concerned about being around that person because they never know when that person's temper is going to flare up. So I remember when I was growing up, we would hear some kids say, or even adults, a lot of adults would say, you should fight fire with fire. Someone comes at you a certain way, you should react back to them in that certain way. It's just the way things are done, at least how that certain kids or even certain adults may view things. That someone comes at you aggressive, you have the right to come back at them aggressive. Well, let's look at that and see if that's the best way to come back, because it's really not the best way to come back. And let's take that euphemism, fighting fire with fire. What happens if you fight fire with fire? You produce a bigger fire. What does fire do? Fire destroys. Fire burns down things that can sometimes not be replaced or even being rebuilt because fire damages them so much. And of course, when we're talking fire, when we're talking about in a social environment, we're talking about people's attitudes or people's mannerisms. What? Even though it's not a physical fire and it doesn't destroy things physically, it can destroy things mentally and socially. I mean, you may have a relationship with a friend because you lost your cool, or you lost your cool with a child and you said some things that was very, very dangerous or very, very damaging to that child's psyche or that adult psyche. It don't have to be a child for someone to damage you in that way. Particularly if it's someone really close to you. So this is one of the fundamental reasons why staying cool is so important, so valuable, because once you destroy something, it's very difficult to rebuild it. And why have to rebuild something if you cannot destroy it in the first place? So what is the opposite of what we just talked about with fire and destroying? The opposite is water, and water has a tendency to be cool. And when we talk about water and staying cool like water, what does water do? Water brings life. Water rejuvenates. Water has the ability to nurture. And when you pour water on the ground, out of the ground comes fruit from trees. Out of the ground comes new life. So if we look at our children, oftentimes as seeds, and sometimes you may even say, well, that's my seed, or it's a euphemism that's even used sometimes. When you pour water on a seed, what does it do to that seed? It helps it to grow. It nourishes it. It gives it things that it needs for that seedling to become a plant or to become a tree. So just by looking at a behavior pattern in that manner, we can easily see the importance and how powerful remaining cool is. When you look at it in those terms, when you look at being cool like being water, and water to a plant we know brings life and nourishment, as to bringing fire to a plant, or even more vulnerable, a new seed. You're putting fire to that. What's going to happen to that seed? What are the chances of that seed growing into a plant, or I should say growing into a proper plant that's able to bear fruit from its leaves? It may be very, very difficult. So let's look at this from that standpoint. So how important it is to remain cool. And then more importantly, to become a parent, you might even take it up a notch and say how to remain super cool. Because now that you understand that being angry and being aggressive is more like fire as opposed to water, do we really want to bring fire toward our children? Of course not. We want to protect them. We want our children to be safe from harm or dangerous things that can bring damage to them. But if we're not careful of our words, if we're using fiery words, words that bring pain, like fire, it could damage our children. Like I talk to teachers, sometimes when teachers get upset, they may say certain things to children that may not necessarily be the best nurturing thing to say to them. But more importantly, the reason that I teach it to them, when they lose their cool, when they lose their composure, and they begin to yell and scream, they're giving the children a very, very clear signal. And what is that signal? The signal is that they're not in control. They're not in charge. Cool people never lose their cool. You know why? Because they're in control of themselves. In fact, that's the definition we're using for super cool. One who is in full control of themselves and do not allow themselves to be moved easily. When we say responsible, that word means that one who's able to respond. Not just one who's able to respond, because almost anyone can respond, but how that person chooses to respond. Give you an example. I remember once I was standing up talking with a friend of mine, and his son came up to him, screaming and yelling, "Daddy, daddy, daddy, daddy!" And he yelled at him, and he said, some mean things to him. He said, of course he said, "Stop! You see me talking, da da da." He said some words to him that I wasn't really, happy with, but he's not my son. I didn't necessarily want to say anything to him at the moment. I eventually did later on that day, but at the moment, in the heat of anger, he said something to his son that was quite damaging. And I looked at his son as he said it to him, and his son replied, "I just want to show you a picture." He had drawn a picture. He says, "Well, you can't show me. I'm standing up here talking with someone," and da da da. So, although he was correct in letting the child know that that wasn't a proper time or a proper way to interrupt a conversation, that was very damaging to the child. Of course, he's a child. He's going to bounce back. He may maybe pout for a little while, and he's back playing. But again, it's those kind of encounters that if continued, can have again long effects on the child and the relationship between the parent and child. Keep in mind now, there's a bond between parent and child, and if the bond between parent and child is constantly exposed to fire, what do you think can happen to that bond? That bond can be weakened or destroyed altogether. So let's look at that same situation and how that maybe he could have handled it a little bit better and got a better result than the one that actually came about. His son comes up screaming and yelling, "Dad, dad, 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 I wanted to show you something." Son, calm down. Don't you see I'm standing up here talking with someone? Is that the way I taught you how to interrupt a conversation? Son probably would have said something. "Okay, Dad, I just want to show you my picture." "Okay, son, I'll look at your picture later. But right now, I'm standing up here and I'm talking to a friend of mine. When I'm finished, I'll come over and take a look at your picture." Now, obviously, that's a very, very vastly different outcome than the one that actually happened. And all it took was knowing about what can happen, what can damage a child, and knowing how to be in full control of yourself at all times. Again, when you're responsible, it means that you have the ability to respond. Any response you give, you're responsible for. It happens because you choose it. You can choose to respond in a way that is in a way that's connected to the principles or the values that you have, or you can choose to respond in an emotional way. It's okay, no matter what they do. We respond with water. Because again, we just said water nurtures that bond. Water protects that bond. And when you are a person who are super cool, it naturally gives the tendency of that child to respect you. Because it's the same way you respect people whom you've seen in the past that have remained cool and calm even in the face of adversity, even when they had all the right to be upset and angry, but they kept their cool. They earned the respect of everyone around them. Why is that? What is it about that draws people in and exhibits power? Because it is power. When you are in control of yourself, you can then control other elements. But you can't control anything if you can't first control yourself, which is why I teach it to teachers. I teach them how to control themselves, which makes it easier for them to control the behavior patterns of their students. So this is why students, and this is why children respect parents who remain super cool no matter what the situation. When you're cool, children, you will find children wanting to tell you more things, open up to you. Why? Because they know you're not going to be moved from a state of cool, calm, where you're able to think and give them advice that they're going to eventually need in the future. And of course, it would allow you to bring structure, because again, you're thinking. You're able to understand what it takes to bring structure, what it takes to, like I gave the example earlier with the child. You know, if you teach that child how to interrupt a conversation by saying excuse me, raising their hand, that structure, even though they ignored it at that time because of the excitement, the other times as you reminded them with water, pouring water on the situation, allowing that connection to be stronger as opposed to using fire, which breaks it down, the next time you're more likely to remember the next time you're talking to someone. And of course, when you are acting in this manner, super cool in everything you do, because if you take this and you utilize it for your children, you use it in other aspects of your life, your self-esteem will get stronger, your self-confidence will grow, because people around you are going to be like, wow, man, if that had been me, man, I'd have lost my cool, man, you a cool person. Could you imagine hearing that? Can you see yourself in situations where you had the right to be upset, but you didn't get upset? You remained cool and calm? Others will notice that around you as well. And of course, if you are cool and calm most of the time, and you don't allow things to rattle you or move you, guess what? That energy that you carry transfers to your children. If you're a calm and cool person, guess what? They're more likely to be a calm and cool person. If you're an argumentative person, always yelling, screaming, and fighting or cursing, guess what they're going to do? They're going to mimic what they see you do. And of course, when you become super cool, it accelerates maturity. You know, we're close to the end of the time of this video. Again, thank you guys for coming by. And I guess we'll see you on the next video. Have a good day.